out of Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 through 14. It's about mixing with the world. Starting verse 11. It came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. Well, there's a whole lot here, more than what you just read. Clearly, he was raised to know that he was Hebrew. Remember that he was with his mother at least till the point that he was weaned. I'm sure that as he grew, he was still able to go back and visit with his parents. He knew who he was as a Jew, but he was also raised an Egyptian. He was raised like one of Pharaoh's sons, it says. So he knew all about the Hebrew way of life, and he knew all about the Egyptian way of life. But isn't that really like we are? Aren't we in the same place? We're raised as Christians, we understand Christian principles, but we're also live and operate in the world, and we understand how that works. So we can identify with this young Moses. And now he faced the big test. He went out to his brethren, he looked on their burdens, and he spied an Egyptian smiting an Hebrew, one of his brethren. So what do you do? What do you do? Now, of course, you can get all religious and call them down in the Christian context, or you can maybe beat him up, or you can tell him not to do that, or you can ignore it. There's a million things that he could have done. But what did he decide to do? Verse 12, and he looked this way and that way, and when he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Well, right off, he knows he's not doing the right thing. How do you know that? He checked to make sure there's nobody else first. Nobody else around. Well, he's not counting the Hebrew that you just saved. Well, he didn't save him. It didn't say that the Egyptian was killing him. He was just beating him up some. Now, you got to ask yourself, never mind the overkill, so to speak. He killed the Egyptian. That seems like a little extreme, but it looked like he was obviously making a point to the Hebrew, who he was. And it involved extreme action. But he knew he wasn't doing right because he made sure that there's nobody else around. And you got to ask, well, did it really require that he be killed? Of course not. I can think of other ways he could have told the Egyptian to stop doing it. He could have even told the Egyptian, because of who he was, to apologize to the Hebrew. Didn't do that. Killed him instead. It's like, wow, that's kind of extreme. And hid him in the sand. Didn't just kill him, but he hid him in the sand. It's like, not going to find him now. There's a lot of sand in Egypt. So, his choice was to do what he felt like doing. Clearly, this was more than what was required, but I suppose maybe he was making a point to the Hebrew. Maybe he felt that he just wanted to make a larger statement. I don't know. I don't know. But I think in other circumstances, someone else would have asked him. He probably wouldn't have recommended that the Egyptian be killed. Yet he did. He followed his heart. And you can see here how dangerous that can be when you just do what you feel like doing. Following your heart. Like the way that it gets romanticized, I'm just following my heart. I'm just doing what I think I should be done. It's like, it sounds good. It's nasty. Why is it nasty? Because it makes you an ultimate authority. You're not responsible to anybody. You're not responsible to God. You're doing what you think is right. But you see, we can't do that as Christians. You can't call yourself Christian and just go out and do your own thing against what God calls you to do. And in fact, it's against his very word. Now, they hadn't had the Ten Commandments at this point, but that's not the point. Anybody walking around and hasn't read the Ten Commandments, no, it's not right to just kill somebody. And I'm sure his parents have taught him that. But still, he made the statement, and he did what he did. But you know, as a Christian, especially as a Christian, you're not going to get away with it. Why? Because God's going to make sure that you get off the fence. You can't be a Christian and part of the world. You're in the world, but you're not part of the world. God is always going to take the Egypt out of you. He can't take you out of Egypt, but he's going to take the Egypt out of you. And that's what he's in the process of doing. Through the difficulties, the problems we encounter, if you look at most of the problems we encounter as Christians, are problems associated with our attitude, our way of thinking, the things that we've done wrong. And God holds us accountable because if he judges us in this life, he won't judge us in the next. Why? Because we're his children. We accept our wrong and we deal with it in this world, which is a whole lot better. Eternity is a long time to be spending in hell. So, he holds us responsible, and we have to face it. So it's always more difficult for Christians than non-Christians. Non-Christians can skate. Christians can't. Because we all have a heavenly daddy that holds us responsible. If we like it or we don't like it. But the price we pay, that is accountability to God, is more than offset by eternity in the presence of God. So he looked this way and that way. He saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian, hid him in the sand. Verse 13, and when he went out the second day, behold, 2 men of the Hebrews strove together. Okay, these are 2 of his folks. And he said to them that did the wrong, wherefore smitest thou thy fellow? Ironic. He just finished killing an Egyptian, not hitting him. You see, when we do our own thing, it exposes our own hypocrisy. What we say versus what we do. And his hypocrisy is manifest. Now, why are you hitting your brother? Now, from the Hebrews' point of view, it's like, well, this guy just came in and killed an Egyptian. He's asking me why I'm hitting my brother. Hitting him isn't like killing. Verse 14, and he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Well, Pharaoh for one thing. He's got a chariot, the Hebrews don't. He's considered a son of Pharaoh, and the Hebrews, well, they're slaves. So they're being pretty feisty when they said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? He's saying, I may be a slave, but you're still not my prince. You still don't have power over me. You can tell me what to do, but you don't have any moral authority over me. Intendest thou to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? That's up in your face. It's like, so, you don't like me hitting my brother, but you kill Egyptians. What, you going to kill me too? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. He knew what was wrong, and now it's manifest. What's the first thing that happened? It's fear. Why? Because there's no God in what he did. And now, you can do what God calls you to do, and sometimes there'll be a bit of fear. But the same Holy Spirit that prompted you to do it will also give you the peace when you press into his presence. This didn't happen here. Because this is a straight case of what the Bible says. You reap, you harvest what you sow, what you put in the ground. Is what you're going. You don't plant beans and expect pineapples. Doesn't work like that. So he killed an Egyptian, and he hid it, but now it's exposed. He didn't think that the Hebrew that he saved would say anything. That's a whopper of an assumption, isn't it? Now, if you're out there and all of a sudden an Egyptian is beating on you, and then here comes a guy that you know is a Hebrew, but high up in Pharaoh's court, and he kills the Egyptian, wouldn't you want to tell everybody? I mean, this is news. Wow, something's going to happen here. And of course he told everybody. Everybody knew. And Moses feared. Why? Because he did something wrong. Why does fear come on us? Well, this is one of the reasons when we do something wrong. Fear also comes on us when we're out of control. But what does that tell us? we haven't given it to God. Because if we're in control and we lose control, we fear because, well, we don't have control anymore. It's an illusion. We never had control. But when you give it to God, you don't fear. Why? Because you know it's in his hands. Moses feared that surely this thing is known. The very thing that he thought he could cover up by hiding it in the sand has come out. And what happens in the process? We know the rest of the story. That's another Sunday. But today, we're looking at this now. This is calling for drastic action on his part. God allowed it. God allowed the killing of an Egyptian just simply to get Moses on track. Because now, he had to leave Pharaoh's court. He had to leave the Egyptian way of thinking, the Egyptian life, all of that. He had to leave Egypt behind. And where did he go? The wilderness. When you get serious with God, you're always going to end up in the wilderness. Sometimes it's because of the things you did. And sometimes it has nothing to do with what you did. And you know what? It doesn't matter who's responsible, whether you did something wrong or you didn't. Because with God, the issue was he needed to get into the wilderness. He needed to get out of the world. He needed to get out of Egypt. And the way that he did it was allowing him to kill an Egyptian. I suppose there was other ways that it could have happened. But he allowed this particular way. Why? So Moses was acutely aware that he was in the wilderness because of his own actions. See, you can't get angry with God because of a mistake that you made. So he recognized this was his mistake. This is his mess up. And now he's in the wilderness. Like I said, different message. But the point is, we are responsible for what we do. We are Christians. We live in the world, our Egypt, and yet we're still Christians. And he expects us to live like Christians in a heathen world. And when we don't, he's going to expose where we're living like Egyptians. And that, at some point, is going to drive us into the wilderness. It doesn't mean we're going to physically move, but it is going to bring us to a place, a wilderness experience spiritually, emotionally. A dry place. A place of solitude. Why? Because that's the place where you face God. That's the place where you come face to face with God and you deal with yourself. There are people in here right today that are experiencing that wilderness experience. It's the hand of God. Don't be angry for it. Embrace it. Because God took them out of the wilderness. And God had them lead a whole people out from Egypt, back into the wilderness, through the wilderness, into the promise. God's called you to the wilderness. Embrace it. He's got bigger plans for you. And that's my message for today.